a urinal cake. He was a horrible, horrible kid. And I just think that if any of us had known what was going to happen to George Peach in October of 1990, I think we would have been nicer to him. I do. I mean, I would have been nicer to him. But there was nothing I could do to help George Peach. I mean, I was drowning too. You know, I didn't have a boyfriend. I didn't have any friends. I never went to wild parties. I was completely invisible. And this one afternoon, we were on the bus, and Simon Drake had George Peach's backpack. And he was taking items out of the backpack, and he was going over to the window and throwing these items out the window. And everybody was laughing, and George Peach was begging him to stop. And then Simon Drake took out George Peach's lunchbox, his Fresh Prince of Bel-Air lunchbox. And for a moment, Simon Drake nearly lost the crowd. Everybody was looking at that lunchbox, and they were thinking the same thing. That is a beautiful lunchbox. And George Peach just screamed, "No, please don't, that was a birthday present." And Simon Drake just laughed. And he went over to the window and he threw it out into traffic. And it got run over by a couple of cars, and eventually it wound up in the gutter. The lunchbox's life, just like the Fresh Prince's, flip-turned upside down. And when everybody was off the bus that afternoon, I saw something that I had never seen before. George Peach started to cry. He physically crumpled. It was like this was just one event too far. You know, and I looked around and I thought, well, there's no one else on the bus. No one's going to see me talking to him. And I sat down next to George and I said, are you okay? And he didn't answer me. And I said, George, can I give you some advice? And George said, sure. And I said, George, you have to stop what you're doing. And George said, but I'm just being myself. And I said, exactly, George. You have to stop that. And I took George Peach under my wing. I taught him everything that I had learned about disappearing, about falling off the radar. I gave him valuable life skills. I mean, skills like giving up, backing down, not being true to yourself. I was like a demotivational guru. And George Peach and I, we became friends. When no one else was around on the bus and it was just the two of us, we would talk. He was like my secret friend. And we started to trust each other. You know, I remember this one afternoon, we were sitting on the bus and his shirt collar was torn, his lip was cut. And I said to George, did Simon Drake do that to you? And he didn't really answer me. He just stared out the window and he said to me, do you know the only thing that keeps me going is knowing that one day I'm going to get out of this shithole. And when I do, I am never coming back. And George said, I'm going to be a magician. George could do magic tricks. And he was really, really good at them. He'd borrowed this book from the school library, and it was called Magic, Illusions, and the Power of Suggestion. And he'd learned all of them. You know, he'd start every trick by going, would you like to see a magic trick? And he could do all these fantastic tricks, like he could bend coins, he could do card tricks. But the real jewel in the crown, like the best trick that he did, was that he would get an item like a pebble or a coin and put it in my fist. And he'd say, all right, now close your hand around it. Now close your eyes and count to 3. And it moved to the other fist. I mean, it was amazing. You know, I said to him, George Peach, you're incredible. And he sort of smiled and he said, you and I should sit together at lunch. And I was like, no, George, come on. And he was like, why not? And I said, George, look, I want you to think of our school. It's like an ocean, all right? And it is infested with sharks. Now, in that ocean, I am a surfer. And my legs are sort of dangling over the side of my surfboard. But you, George, you're like a fat seal with its period. And I know that that is a very harsh aquatic simile, I know. But I had to look out for myself. I looked out for myself. And in October of 1990, we went away on a school camp to a place called Camp Yondeo. And what happened at Camp Yondeo, it affected George Peach for the rest of his life. Now, Camp Yondeo was a beach camp. So you had this huge sprawling beach, and then there was the beach camp, and then there was this huge forest with a lake. So on the first night, we were in our tent. We were in our same-sex tent. And the talk turned to boys. Of course it turned to boys. Now, one of the girls in our tent had a boyfriend, and her name was Gretchen Buttsworth. She actually had a boyfriend. They had met when they...